I have a dream that one day,
no matter how long it may take us,
as long as we have faith in our cause and an unconquerable willpower,
knowing that here on earth, God's work must truly be our own.
This is a time of challenge to our interests and our values, and it's a time to test our wisdom and our skills.
This will not be a campaign of half measures, and we will accept no outcome but victory.
Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept.
Well, good morning. If you didn't know, I'll fill you in. We're in the middle of a presidential election. Did y'all know that? You can't help but notice, because every day your news feed is filled with headlines of what he said, what she said, how he responded, how she responded, right? I have a feeling this week here in the LBK we'll be protected from that just a little bit. After the game last night, there'll probably be a few more headlines for a couple of days here in Lubbock. I live in Friendship Nation. A few headlines for that in the next couple of days. But overall, you can't help but notice. Like I said, you turn on your TV, you turn on the radio in your car, you open your news feed, you open social media, and every day you've got one of the candidates telling you how America is messed up and what he or she can do to fix the mess up, right? And we're barraged by this every single day. And there are some of us in this room who take the side of him and think that he's right on and he's the one that's got the answer for America. There are some of us in this room who think she's right on and she's got the answer for America. And there are some of us in this room who are wondering, just days away from the election, who the hell am I going to vote for? Right? Now, I'm not trying to make a political speech here, and Michael came up and told you very well earlier that this is a very polarizing election. And we're going to start this series, and through the next 4 weeks, we're going to preach this series on politics. Oh, say, can't you see? During none of these sermons will you hear me or anybody else up here endorse any candidate. And here's why. Because he is not the answer. She is not the answer. Nor any person you would fill in the blank is the answer. The answer is you. Today is September 11th, the 15th anniversary of 9/11. I know you don't have to think long and hard if you were alive then about where you were when you first heard the news, first saw the images. I know you don't have to go back very far to think about your emotions on that day, what you were feeling, what you were sensing, the confusion that you had on that day, the images that you remember of those first responders rushing in courageously. In fact, I know that in this room this morning we have some first responders. If you're a first responder, would you stand up? Because we just want to honor you this morning and what you do. I also want to take you to those first few hours and days following the events of 9/11. Do you remember some of the very poignant images? Do you remember the image of Congress standing on the steps of Capitol Hill, joining together in God Bless America? Do you remember the prayer vigils that broke out? Some planned and some spontaneous, some in churches and some on street corners. Do you remember even here in West Texas, for a few Sundays following the events of 9/11, our churches were filled to overflowing because people had questions. How could this happen? What do we do? Where is God in all of this? And so they turn to the church to seek after God, to find God. And 15 years later, America is removed from that realization. But listen, it was true on 9/11 and it's true today. The answer is not on Air Force One. The answer is not on Capitol Hill. The answer is not on the bench of the Supreme Court justices. The answer is God. And that is found in the church, which means it's found in you. The answer is you. So we're going to take a journey for the next 4 weeks. We're going to be looking in the book of Jonah. So if you have a Bible with you, I would encourage you to turn there. If you want to pull out your phone and click over to Jonah. For the next 4 weeks, we're going to be studying the book of Jonah. And I would encourage you to be studying the book of Jonah. It's only 4 chapters. It's very short. In fact, in my Bible, it covers 2 pages. If you're having a hard time because you have a real Bible with you this morning, not that the one on your phone is not real, but if you have a hard copy of the Bible and you can't find it, do what I do. Just go to the table of contents and look for Jonah and turn over to that page. And I want to encourage you to spend some time there over the next 4 weeks studying the story of Jonah. Because what we're going to do on this journey is we're going to draw a parallel between Jonah and the United States of America. And you will find, I think, by the end of this 4 weeks, how eerie similar it is. And today, we're going to just start with the first 3 verses of Jonah. Now, many of you know the story of Jonah. God told him to go to Nineveh. He decided he wasn't going to go to Nineveh. God said, you are going to go to Nineveh. So he caused this big fish to swallow Jonah in the belly of the whale. Jonah changed his mind. He went to Nineveh. Everything happened there, and then Jonah pouted at the end of the story. Many of you know the story. Many of you are familiar. Even if you've never been in church before, some of you have some familiarity with the story of Jonah. One of my favorite stories of Jonah is the little elementary girl who was in her art class, and she was challenged by her teacher to draw a picture of an amazing event. And she had just heard the story of Jonah in Sunday school the week before, and so she began to draw this picture of a big fish, which she imagined as a whale, which Scripture never tells us it was a whale, just that it was a big, great fish. And she drew this picture of a whale that looked like a whale, and she drew Jonah in the belly of the whale. And as her art teacher came by and began to question her about her picture, what is it? What are you drawing? What is this amazing event? Oh, it's about Jonah and the whale. The Jonah was swallowed by this whale, and he spent 3 days in the whale, and then the whale spit Jonah out onto the shore, and the teacher's like, now, do you really, really, really believe that happened? Oh, yes, I believe it happened, because we learned about it in Sunday school this week, and you know what? And the teacher's like, do you really believe? Yes, I really believe it happened, and when I get to heaven, I'm going to ask Jonah all about it. And the teacher said, well, what if Jonah's not in heaven? And the little girl looked at her and said, then you can ask him. Here, the story of Jonah can be summed up really easily. Ready? Here's the story of Jonah. God said go. Jonah said no. God said, oh? That's the story of Jonah. So this morning, we're going to look at God said go and Jonah said no. And then the other 3 weeks, we're going to look at God saying, oh? All right. So, Jonah chapter 1, verses 1 through 3. In the English Standard Version, it reads this way. Now the word of the Lord came to Jonah, the son of Amittai, saying, arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and call out against it, for their evil has come up before me. But Jonah rose to flee to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. He went down to Joppa and found a ship going to Tarshish. So he paid the fare and went on board to go with them to Tarshish, away from the presence of the Lord. Now the word of the Lord came to Jonah. Now the word of the Lord came to Jonah. Now the word of the Lord came to who? How do we know Jonah? The only way we know Jonah is from the story, and we know Jonah because he lived inside the belly of a whale for 3 days, which is such a small part of the entire story. In fact, it's only 3 verses out of 4 chapters. But I want you to understand that when this was penned, when Jonah tells us his story, nobody knew Jonah. The word of the Lord came to Jonah. Listen, Jonah lived in the 18th century. He was a prophet. You can read about it in 2 Kings chapter 14. What you'll also read in 2 Kings chapter 14 is that the king of Israel during this time was a guy named Jeroboam. The word of the Lord did not come to the president of Israel. The word of the Lord did not come to the king of the Assyrian Empire, which is where Nineveh was located, by the way. His name was Ashur-dan. Sounds like a character out of Forrest Gump, doesn't it? That's not who God came to. God did not come to the king of Nineveh, to the mayor of Nineveh, to the leader of Nineveh. God came to this nobody named Jonah. Listen, this is why it's not about the White House or Capitol Hill or the bench of the justices. Because God comes not to the president all the time, not to the congressman or congresswoman or to the chief justice or to just the preacher or to the person sitting next to you. The word of the Lord comes to you. Where's God been speaking to you? Where has God's word been coming to you? Where has God been giving you something he wants you to do? Where has God been talking directly to you? The word of the Lord came to Jonah, saying, "Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and call out against it. For there evil has come up before me." The literal reading of arise, go to Nineveh is get up and go. The word of the Lord came to Jonah saying, get up and go. So Jonah did just that. He got up and went the wrong way. Scripture says instead of going to Nineveh, he went to Tarshish. Let me give you this reference. Instead of going the 500 miles northeast to Nineveh, he attempted to go 2,000 miles west to Tarshish. Here's the point. He was attempting to go as far away from Nineveh as he possibly could. Scripture says to flee the presence of the Lord. Where is God speaking to you? And where are you going the wrong way? Where are you running? Where are you trying to escape God's call on your life? What God is speaking to you? What God is asking you to do? Anybody in here familiar with the story of Wrong Way Roy? Roy Riegels. He played center and nose guard for the University of California in 1929. Well, in the late 1920s. In 1929, he played in the Rose Bowl against the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets. In one play in the game, there was a fumble. And Roy Riegels fell on the fumble and then picked it up and began to advance it. The problem was he got turned around and began to run towards the wrong end zone. Before he could get to the end zone and score for the other team, one of his own teammates came off the sideline and tackled him. He got the nickname Wrong Way Roy. This happened to me, not to me, but I remember this happening when I was in high school. It was during a basketball game, not a guy's basketball game, but a girl's basketball game. I'm not being sexist, I'm just telling you it happened in a girl's basketball game. And one of my friends did the same thing. I can't remember exactly, but I think it was an inbounds play. and the ball was thrown into her. And when it was thrown to her, for some odd reason, instead of just taking the ball and shooting it on our end, she took off dribbling towards the other end. And while she was dribbling towards the other end, everybody was yelling at her, "No, Casey, no, 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 Casey, no." She scored for the other team. And at the end of the game, she said, "I thought everybody was saying, go, 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 Casey, go." Does that ever happen to you? Any of you ever just got gone off the wrong direction in your car, you got turned around, you don't know, or maybe you're standing in a hotel room and for some reason you walk out of your room and you think you're supposed to go this way and you're really supposed to go this way? How many of you play golf? Has your golf ball ever gone the wrong direction? We were in the mountains of Ruidoso last weekend, and on Sunday I got to play golf. Now that's a real treat for a preacher to get to play golf on Sunday. And to not have to lie about it. And so I was getting to play golf on Sunday, and we were on the back nine, and it was a par 3 hole, and we came up on the tee box, and there were these deer, like 5 or 6 of them, that were standing on the tee box. And as we pulled up in our golf carts, we were playing in a group, so we had 4 golf carts, and so as we pulled up on our golf carts, the deer started to scatter and run off of the tee box, off the fairway, out of the way, except for this one doe who ran about 30 yards from the tee box and stood there. This par 3 hole is surrounded by condominiums. And so there are tons of people out on their decks and their patios watching about what's fixing to happen here. This one deer stands on the fairway. Everybody goes up to tee off. I'm the last one. The deer hasn't moved an inch. And I'm going to admit to you, I was a little nervous because I'm not the best shot in golf. But I thought, this is a par 3. I'm just going to get under the ball. It's going to go up. It's going to land right on the green, right? I stood up there to tee off, and I hit a line drive that hit that deer right in the flank. And the deer hopped up, then started limping on its back leg. All these New Mexican animal lovers started yelling and cussing at me because I had hit the deer. I'm like, I should have aimed at the deer. I wouldn't have hit it, right? Sometimes my golf ball just doesn't go the right direction. The deer was fine. No animals were harmed in the making of this sermon illustration. Perhaps you're not headed in the direction God is wanting you to go. Perhaps you're not headed in the direction God has been calling you to go. Perhaps you have felt God speaking to you, sharing with you, asking you to take a step of obedience, asking you to go someplace. And you've been saying, no, that's their job. That's their responsibility. It's much easier for me to just sit and whine and complain about it on Facebook. You see, there are 2 roads in life. One road leads to Nineveh. The other road leads to Tarshish. One road is the will of God. The other is disobedience to His will. Which road are you on? Are you doing what God has asked you to do? Are you rebelling against what He has asked you to do? Let's think about Jonah. God obviously came and spoke directly to him and said, "Get up and go." And he tried to run from God. Why do you think he did that? Why do you think he tried to disobey God? I mean, I can think of all kinds of reasons. Maybe it was just fear. Maybe he was scared to death of what God was asking him to do. I mean, God was asking him to take this message to the Ninevites. The Ninevites were nasty people. We'll get into more of that next week, but for this morning, you just need to know they were nasty, evil, wicked, terrible people. And God was asking Jonah to deliver a message to these nasty, wicked, terrible, evil people. By the way, we're going to get into the correlation between Nineveh and America next week. But maybe he was just scared of going to those people. Maybe he was scared because God was calling him out of his comfort zone. God was asking him to do something that wasn't normal for him, that he wasn't used to, that wasn't easy for him, that was going to stretch him, that was going to grow him. I got to tell you, as the staff has watched our transition, we hope that we're at the midpoint this Sunday. We should be. But as we've seen this transition over the last 3 weeks, that's what we've seen, not only in you, but in us. It was when God calls us to something that's uncomfortable, that we're not used to, that requires change, that asks us to stretch ourselves. We began to backpedal some. We began to have fear. We began to go to Tarshish instead of Nineveh, even though we know without a doubt that's what God has called us to. Lowell Ogilvie says that there are 365 references in the Bible that say, fear not, one for every day of the year. Because God knows that fear is one of those things that will cause us to run the wrong direction. Remember the scouts that went and explored the promised land? They had heard from God. They knew this land was theirs. God had given it to them. 12 scouts, 10 of them come back. They're big, they're huge, they're ugly, they're going to kill us. No, we're not going. You remember that? Joshua takes over after they've wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. Over and over and over and over in the book of Joshua, God says to Joshua, be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do you think Peter was fearful when he stepped out of the boat to walk on water? But you know what Peter did? He ran towards God, not away from God. And he experienced something that no one besides Jesus has ever experienced. Maybe it was fear. I don't know. Maybe Jonah thought the task was just too difficult and that he was inadequate. Ever been there? You just feel like you're not the right person for the job. Surely God couldn't be calling me to this task. Surely God wouldn't call me and ask me to do this. I'm not equipped. I don't have the gifts. This is not my thing. I've never done this before. You ever been there? Let me tell you about Jonah. Jonah was a prophet, right? A prophet was someone that was called to give God's message to God's people. You can read about that in 2 Kings chapter 14. The entire book of Jonah. I encourage you over these next 4 weeks to study the book of Jonah. But let me tell you something about a prophet. Prophets were just ordinary people. They got up every morning and put their pants on just like everybody else did, one leg at a time. They were just common, ordinary people that were called to speak on behalf of someone else. They were called to speak on behalf of God. Let me put it to you this way. Any of you, let me approach it this direction. Did any of you ever have a job as a newspaper boy or girl? Anybody? So, some of you in here had a job as a newspaper boy or girl. Well, what did you do? You either rode your bike or rode your car and delivered the newspaper, correct? Was it your news? You were just delivering the news for somebody else, weren't you? That's what a prophet did. They were just delivering the message, delivering the news for someone else. And they knew that the results were up to God. Listen, if you were a newspaper boy or girl and you threw the newspaper out and somebody went and picked up the newspaper and read the headline and that made them angry, they weren't angry at you. You were just delivering the news. They were angry at the person creating the news, right? That's what prophets understood. They were just to deliver the message, to deliver the news. And God asks us to do the same thing today. If He shows up and speaks to you or calls you and asks you to go a certain direction and you feel like you're inadequate, listen, you do what you can do and God will do what you cannot do. You will do what God is asking you to do, and God will take care of the rest. God is not interested in your success. God is interested in your faithfulness. God was not interested in Jonah's success. God was just interested in his obedience to what God was asking him to do. The same is true of you and I. Remember in Acts chapter 4, when Peter and John healed the lame beggar, and they were put on trial. And in Acts chapter 4, verse 13, after they've pled their case, you read this, that the leaders were astonished at Peter and John. Why? Because they were ordinary. Acts chapter 4, verse 13. Listen, see, we have such a fascination with the person who holds the seat in the Oval Office, or the justices who hold their seats, or those who are elected to represent us. That's not where the answer lies. The answer lies in God showing up to you and speaking to you. And the question is, will you run towards God or away from God? Maybe Jonah didn't want to go because he was just apathetic. God, I've been there, done that. God, did you read 2 Kings chapter 14? I've already delivered a message to Jeroboam. Here's the point I'm trying to make. Perhaps Jonah just wasn't concerned about Nineveh, or the people of Nineveh, or the children in Nineveh. And before we sit back and go, man, that's pretty harsh, that's pretty brutal. Let me tell you something. As we go down this journey the next 3 weeks, it's going to get it's going to get brutal. Thank you. And harsh. And here's why. Listen to me. Because we're going to see the comparison between Jonah's apathy and our apathy. This sometimes what happens to us is we get so self-absorbed, we become apathetic towards those who are hurting. It becomes all about us. And as long as we stay comfortable, and as as long as it all works the way we want it to work for us, as long as it pleases us, as long as it doesn't mess up our routine, as long as it doesn't mess up our schedule, then we're great with it. But man, hey, listen, if it starts to change the way I do things, if it starts to change the way I like things, if it starts changing the way that I want to be comfortable, then I'm just not going to have anything to do with it. Or worse yet, how can I complain about it? How can I work to destroy this? I don't know, maybe that was Jonah's case. Maybe Jonah knew that what God said was going to happen would really happen, and that he would bring revival to Nineveh. Maybe he knew that God would forgive the Ninevites and give them a second chance. The whole story of Jonah is not about the 3 verses that tell us about the well. The whole story of Jonah is about second chances. You see, God was about to give the Ninevites a second chance, and ironically, he was going to give Jonah a second chance as well. And this morning, he's giving us a second chance. The answer lies here in this room with you. Where is God speaking to you? Where is God calling you? And where have you been running? Towards that calling or away from that calling?